Imagine two men walking into a room thousands of miles from the front lines. Yet the fate of those front lines may be decided in the next few minutes. 1. The returning U.S. President, brash, unpredictable, and carrying a promise that peace could be just one deal away. The other, the long-standing Kremlin leader, measured, calculating, and unwilling to show his cards too soon. Between them lies not just a table, but the weight of history, the cost of war, and the dreams of millions who have waited for an end to the bloodshed. And here's the question that no one dares to ask out loud. In Alaska, will these two men start the blueprint for peace, or the roadmap for a new kind of Cold War? Mr. President, if I may, think of this meeting as a chessboard positioned on thin ice. Every move is deliberate, every pause calculated, and the consequences can crack the very ground beneath both players. Donald Trump has said, within the first 2 minutes, I'll know if a peace deal is possible. That's not just confidence, it's a gamble. In high-stakes diplomacy, early impressions can be decisive or dangerously misleading. In those first minutes, gestures matter as much as words. Does Putin lean forward? Does Trump cross his arms? These are not just body language cues. They're signals to allies, adversaries, and even markets across the globe. For Trump, this Alaska meeting is not just about Ukraine, it's about reasserting America's role as the ultimate dealmaker. He's hinted at land swaps, suggesting Ukraine and Russia might trade territory for peace. To the political layman, that sounds like a straightforward compromise. But to a military strategist, that's like trading away pieces of the defensive wall during a siege. Once gone, they may never be reclaimed. Trump wants results, preferably fast. But speed in diplomacy can be like speed in surgery. It might stop the bleeding or cause irreversible damage. President Putin comes to Alaska not in weakness, but in strategic patience mode. To him, this summit is less about ending the war outright and more about cementing Russia's current advantages, territorial, political, and psychological. The Kremlin has long viewed talks as another battlefield, where words can shift borders just as surely as tanks. Putin knows that Trump values personal rapport, so expect subtle maneuvers, flattery without commitment, firmness without outright refusal. Think of it as a fisherman who lets the line slacken just enough to keep the fish hopeful before pulling it tight. President Zelensky watches this from Kiev with a mix of hope and deep caution. His stance is clear: no land for peace. Not because he is stubborn, but because every inch of ceded territory sets a precedent. For Ukraine, accepting a land swap is like a homeowner agreeing to share part of their living room with the intruder. Once you accept it, you can never truly call the house yours again. He fears being sidelined. History has shown, whether it was Yalta in 1945 or back-channel Cold War deals, that when the most powerful players meet without you in the room, the outcome can feel less like diplomacy and more like division. From the trenches to the diplomatic halls, the air is thick with uncertainty. I've walked in war zones where the silence before an assault feels heavier than the gunfire itself. This Alaska meeting carries that same stillness. There's no smoke in the air, but you can feel the weight of the unspoken troop movements, economic sanctions, intelligence reports, all unrolled like invisible maps between these two leaders. Let's play out the scenario that's been whispered in military and intelligence circles. What if Trump and Putin agree to a temporary ceasefire with territorial compromises? The fighting stops for now. Relief floods through cities. But months later, Russia consolidates its gains, fortifies the border, and uses the pause to rearm. Ukraine, weakened by the loss, faces internal political unrest. NATO becomes split, half claiming victory for peace, half warning it's only a matter of time before the next offensive. And here's the kicker: China watches this and learns that persistence pays, while smaller nations take note. Alliances can bend if the right leaders make the right promises at the right table. Diplomatic summits are like stage plays. Every handshake, every smile, even the choice of tea can send a message. The location, Alaska, wasn't chosen randomly. It's U.S. soil, but geographically close to Russia, symbolizing a meeting halfway. It's a reminder that proximity doesn't always mean alignment. Trump will likely aim for photo ops that suggest mutual respect, while Putin will ensure that any image broadcast in Russia portrays him as an equal, never as a supplicant. This is optics warfare, and in our modern media age, a single photograph can be more powerful than 1,000 communiques. Behind closed doors, the topics will range far beyond Ukraine: energy exports, sanctions, cyber operations, even Arctic military presence. These are all on the hidden agenda. As a senior advisor, I'd tell any civilian politician, watch the sidelines of the meeting as closely as the main event. The real breakthroughs or breakdowns often happen during those informal conversations between aides, ministers, and translators. After the meeting, expect 3 very different public messages. Trump will frame it as progress, even if no concrete deal emerges, to maintain momentum and public perception of leadership. Putin will address the Russian public as though Moscow's core demands remain unshaken, reinforcing strength at home. Zelensky will reassert that Ukraine's sovereignty is non-negotiable, both for his people and to keep Western support solid. The global audience will see the same event through 3 different lenses, each tinted by domestic politics and strategic necessity. For the soldiers in the trenches, this meeting is not abstract politics. It's the difference between going home or going back into the fight. For families displaced by war, it's the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, the worst is over. And for the political class, it's the balancing act between justice and compromise. Diplomacy, like war, is rarely about absolutes. It's about the smallest wins in the toughest rooms. The Alaska sum, it is not the end game. It's the opening move in a new phase of this geopolitical contest. Whether it leads to peace, a pause, or a provocation will depend less on what's signed on paper and more on what's left unsaid between the lines. In the theater of global politics, this is one of those rare acts where the entire audience, nations, markets, and militaries, is holding its breath. And in that silence, the power lies not in the loudest voice, but in the one that chooses when to speak. History is not made by speeches alone. It's carved in the choices made when the world isn't watching. Alaska may just be another point on the map, but for the men stepping into that room, it could become the hinge on which the next decade swings. And if you think that's too much weight for one meeting, remember this: every turning point in history began as a moment that seemed too small to matter, until it did.